Patrick, welcome. And for those of you who are watching the video version of this interview, which is, by the way, going to be very raw, it's kind of like the bonus content to accompany our podcast. I did want to have you do just a general introduction of who you are and your role, or your many roles, because you have a lot going on.
I do. I have too much going on. So I'm right now serving as assistant professor in the Department of Decision Sciences here at George Washington University. In addition to that, I advise mostly large banks and large government agencies on AI risk management. And I'm on the volunteer board of directors of the AI incident database. We can get started there. That's probably
Good
yeah.
place to
Yeah.
start. Interesting. I've never actually heard of decision science
Mhm.
before.
Mm,
I'm
mhm,
usually, when we're talking to folks, talking to data scientists
mhm,
and machine learning
mhm.
scientists and AI. Can you give a quick definition of what decision science is? And then we can take it from there too.
I'll just go ahead and poke the bear a little bit. I would say like decision science is data science, but with actual science. I've
Ooh,
been a critic of the lack of science in data science for years, and I'll just go ahead and keep poking on that. Decision science is an older field that mixes statistics and optimization for making quantitatively driven decisions in large organizations. It grew out of operations research, or at least many of my colleagues here at the university have a background in operations research. So it's just a more traditional field than data science. Data science has been around, arguably since the 1970s, but obviously took off in recent years. I would say decision sciences took off, slightly before data science. It's just a little bit older, more traditional field.
okay. So it's almost like the ancestor of where we get to machine learning, or
I would say machine learning as a field might actually be older than all of
be
these, right?
older.
Like machine learning as a field dates back to the at least the 1950s, and that's something that I always like to point out to my students is that machine learning is a much older technology than laptops or Wi-Fi and all these things that we depend on today. It's lived through many iterations and forms over these 70 so odd years.
What do you think, and this is something I ask a lot of our guests, is there a theme or a through line that you can look back on that led you to this point in your life and career, that maybe from childhood or at some point you said, okay, this is the direction that I'm heading in?
Well, I'm a big nerd, and that probably has something to do with it. I always paid attention to my teachers and looking back can think of a lot of experiences with teachers that probably set me down this path. And I find industry frustrating. I don't necessarily think that the AI industry is special or something like that, or especially frustrating. I could easily end up back in industry. I think that for me, academia and government make a little bit more sense to me just in terms of how I spend my time. And I'm a big nerd. And so that's probably how I ended up here.
What really engages your curiosity when it comes to AI and specifically governance in AI?
I don't think AI is the burning problem of our time, right? I think
Okay.
climate change, nuclear weapons, threats to democracy, these are the real sort of burning problems of our time. And AI can accelerate those problems. And it's just the one that I happen to know the most about. And so if I can spend my time sort of getting some problems with AI under some amount of control, then I find that very motivating to prevent the acceleration of what I would say is more pressing social or global issues. I'm just not a nuclear weapons expert or, environmental sciences PhD. I know about AI and it's the one that I feel like I can contribute on.
But it's interesting because not everybody who knows about AI wants to be on this
Yeah.
side of the AI development conversation,
Yeah.
right? When it comes to responsibility and ethical
Hmm.
practices and reining certain aspects of development in,
Yeah.
if that's in fact. So, what made you decide to go on this side of it instead of, say, more of the developer side of it?
Honestly, I think a really deeply motivating thing here might be my previous comments on on science. The scientific method, it will be one of the things that if something saves us from climate change or nuclear weapon proliferation or failing democracies, one of the things that will save us will be the scientific method. And I think just the abject sort of rejection of the scientific method that I see in a lot of industry is one of the reasons I'm motivated to be on the side. I think what a lot of people don't understand about AI governance is it basically says do science. Stop doing this fake, unexplainable trial and error. Maybe it works, maybe it doesn't. If you close your eyes, it's a parlor trick. It says stop doing stuff like that and start applying the scientific method to make real progress. And I think that that's probably the part of it that's most inspiring to me, and the part that I feel like I can focus on and make progress on.
Talk to me a little bit more about that approach of scientific
Mhm.
inquiry and with governance as opposed to what people are doing. Can you give me more examples of what you're seeing being done wrong and also how to approach it in the correct way or
Yeah,
in a
yeah.
more scientific way?
I mean, the way I was taught to do data science, and honestly, the way I teach my students, right? Like, even in decision sciences, we teach data science, and it just makes no sense, right? Like, we go and get some data. It's data that's available, not data that's appropriate, right? It's typically some byproduct of some other business process. It's just data that's laying around and available. And right there, you've gone off the path in terms of traditional scientific methodology, right? For decades, statisticians would have said, well, you're supposed to design experiments, right? You're supposed to use your big human brain and design experiments to collect the appropriate data to answer the questions that you want to answer. And, it flies in the face of big data. It flies in the face of sort of overly complex black box models. And so I would just say, right there, step one, we're already off the path. Then we do this sort of really silly thing where we go digging around in that data for a hypothesis. Again, we're veering off the path of traditional methodology here, where in the past you would have done a literature search or you would have used your previous research to develop a hypothesis. But we're looking through data to find a hypothesis about that data set. And then we're somehow, for some reason, allowed to test that hypothesis in that same data set, right? And at that point, like, you've done nothing, right? You've spent money, you've burned chip cycles, you've used water and carbon dioxide, and what you've done is trick yourself, right? What you've done is confirmation bias. And so I would say I can give you specific examples, but I would say if you look around, that describes 80% of what's happening in machine learning today, probably both in academia and in industry. And I'm not immune to this, right? Like, we teach our students these same silly steps. When I'm building a model, I fall prey to some of these things. It's very expensive and time consuming to set up experiments. But I think if we're going to make, you know, if we're going to go beyond machine learning, we're going to have to do some of that. We're going to have to buckle down and do some more traditional science and field work and understand how these systems impact communities and users, and not just think of whatever some test data metric as the end all be all assessment of whether a system is good or not.
Are there any examples that you point to with your students when you say, okay, this is what it looks like out in the world when we use this backwards approach to data science and machine learning and generative AI, for example?
Yeah, that's what the AI incident database is for. It has 600 and some examples now, which is way too few, way, way too few. There's clearly been many more AI incidents than that. But we have about 600 examples of automated systems sort of going wrong. And it's anywhere from, funny stuff. Like, most people have heard of this. There was a Chinese movie star who got an insane number of jaywalking tickets because their face was on a bus that was triggering facial recognition cameras. So it goes from stuff like that to, death and suicide and people getting hurt, really a lot of people getting hurt really badly. And so there's just this whole range of sort of failure modes to learn from if people are interested in that.
You mentioned before about the black
Yeah,
box
yeah.
kind of mentality, and at Writer, that's something that we recognize as a huge challenge
Hmm.
when it comes to implementing AI
Hmm.
governance at an enterprise level.
Hmm.
Talk to us about transparency and explainability. And first of all, talk through what this challenge is for people who may not be as well versed.
Yeah,
But then also, what are the solutions that you've been working on? And what does that look like in the world?
sure. So I think, again, I want to start and say that for hundreds of years, maybe thousands of years, models have been thought of at, all models are wrong, some models are useful. That's a way people talked about it in decades past. But for centuries, if not millennia, humans have used models as a simplified way to understand hard things in reality. And by definition, a model would have to be interpretable so that you can understand reality, right? We're using it because reality is very complex and we need to simplify it so we can understand it throughout most of the previous parts of my careers to make decisions, right? AI and machine learning and statistical learning have been, previously before this incredible revolution of generative AI have been focused on decision making. So we would have used models to learn about reality in some way that we understood was approximate and simplified and use that as sort of a decision support mechanism. So we want to be able to have some understanding of a complex phenomenon, wrap our mind around it, and have that help us make a decision. It's like the basic problem setup. And I would argue that people have thought of models that way for hundreds, if not thousands of years. In recent times, for better and worse, there's reasons that machine learning sort of won out in the commercial market because it apparently performs better in many cases. But the hallmark of machine learning is that the models are unexplainable. I know some people don't like the term black box, so I'll switch to unexplainable, but I feel like it can be confusing to start out by not saying black box. So these unexplainable models have emerged sort of prominently in recent years, at least in some part because people feel like they perform better. They're more accurate in terms of some decision making output. Now, I'm not sure that's always true, but I think there's at least some evidence of that. But the problem is when you have a system that's so complex that it's unexplainable, no one can know if it's been altered. It's just computer system, right? It's just software, and computers, it can be hacked. So if a system is so complex that no one understands how it works, it's hard to know if it's been altered. If a system is so complex that no one knows how it works and it's causing problems, say it has some non-discrimination issue or it has some data privacy issue. Well, if it's so complex that no one understands how it works, you kind of have to go back to the drawing board. You can't fix it because nobody understands it. And just in general, the biggest way to step back is to say it's just harder to manage risk in systems we don't understand. It's possible. We've done it for years, but it's just much harder to manage risk in systems that we don't understand. And I think that that's kind of the easiest way to say it. So that's the kind of problem set up. And what many people have done about it. And again, so I work mostly in decision support, using these systems to learn from data to help people make decisions, sometimes making decisions automatically. And for those kinds of business problems, we've made huge progress. There's a whole class of machine learning models. Originally, the work was done by people like Cynthia Rudin at Duke University, Rich Caruana at Microsoft Research, Augusto Gianto at Wells Fargo Bank. This group of researchers have built out a new class of model, very fancy machine learning models that are also completely explainable. And so I would like to emphasize that sort of on the structured data, traditional business data mining side of things, this issue of transparency, at least from a technical standpoint, is mostly solved. Now, can I magically wave a wand and have the world stop using scikit-learn? No, so it's kind of a one by one sort of battle with students and clients and things like this to point out that, like, hey, you don't have to have a black box model. You can have a highly performant, fully transparent model. And so on that side of the world, I'd say we've made huge progress. And it's this new rush of generative AI where some people just seem to like take a lot of happiness in how complex these systems are and how
Mm.
ununderstandable these systems are, where I think we're kind of having problems with explainability again.
What do you think that's about, Patrick? Why do you think that people find some kind of, I don't even know what the word is, but connect with this idea of a system that is somehow an enigma or
Oh, I
mysterious?
think it's very simple. I think it's that life is hard and boring and we all want some kind of magic thing to come save us. And I think it's just that. I think it's just that. And I think, there's a self-aggrandizing element here as well that, it's like I made this system that's so complex, no other humans can understand it. But basically, it's just unscientific magical thinking is what it boils down to. And it's also very convenient. It's very convenient to say, oh, we didn't know there was child porn in the training data. Forgive us, it's so complicated. We didn't know there was nuclear weapons information in the training data. There was so much of it. That kind of bad faith justification is the real reason we have to talk about transparency and governance. I'm glad we got there. But generally, when people are acting in good faith, transparency is important. When people are acting in bad faith, then we really have to have transparency. So yeah, I think there's bad faith actors in the AI industry. Of course there are. There are in every industry. AI is not special. It's not a special industry. There are bad actors. There are people and organizations for whom, having a black box is just so complicated. They didn't know what was in it. It's just super convenient, and there's also that aspect of it.
Now that we've talked about this magical thinking and versus scientific thinking in terms of explainability, let's talk about auditability
Mm-hmm.
and the work that you've been doing. Now, are you actually performing audits, or are you advising people on how to prepare for a model audit? And also, are these AI developers that you're working with, or are these enterprise companies that are working with models?
All that's probably not the best answer, but I think there's this temptation to boil, AI audit down into some, easily defined sort of package of behaviors and steps. And my experience is it just can't be that. Now, it needs to be that one day. An audit needs to be standardized and transparent. But my experience is when people ask you to do an audit, they could mean any of those things. They could mean, can you tell me how to do an audit? They could mean, can you do the audit? They could mean you're just going to work with our governance and legal, or they could mean you're going to sit down with our data scientist and work with them. So really, it can be all of those things. I would say the most sort of standard setup is an audit for non-discrimination purposes. You're working in some regulated industry like consumer finance, or you're sort of at the regulated tip of the spear in employment where you're making employment decisions. Typically there you'd work more with their legal and governance and compliance people, request data from the developers and do an analysis and get back to them with a report about any potential kind of non-discrimination issues they might be facing. And it's really important there. And I think this is the beauty of audit as opposed to some kind of just technical evaluation is there's no problem with an AI system. Generally, there's no real problem. There's no interesting problem with an AI system that is just a technology problem. AI systems are socio-technical systems. All the problems arise from people. All technology problems are people problems. So in that audit report, we might get into sort of governance processes and cultural issues. And I think that's a really important aspect of the audit is the socio-technical side of the outcome and not just the, hey, you passed the silly bias test or you failed the silly bias test. But you have to do both. At the same time, I work with a lot of social scientists and attorneys these days. And I think oftentimes my role is to say, yeah, the data scientists are really silly and they're doing really silly, unscientific things. But that doesn't mean that all science and data is bad. Like we really need both. We really need both. And that's one of the biggest difficulties. One of the biggest difficulties with doing a good audit and doing good governance is you need contribution from all these different parties and entities. And that's just hard. It's hard to talk to all these different kinds of people just for the same reason it's hard to go to Thanksgiving dinner, right? Like everybody has their politics, everybody has their agenda. People are people. AI systems have all kinds of problems. People have all kinds of problems. So the human element is not to be downplayed or dismissed in these things.
Let's say that I'm a CIO
Mm-hmm.
at an enterprise
Mm-hmm.
company. Talk me through what a good audit looks like
So, all right.
of
So to be
an
blunt
AI system.
and to be funny, the CIO never wants the audit. It's always the general counsel. So, you're the general counsel, you want the audit. The CIO has already threatened to quit over the audit.
Mm.
So here's what causes audits. Okay. Whistleblowers, Senate hearings, attorneys general, enforcement actions or lawsuits, regulatory lawsuits, plaintiff lawsuits. Nobody's just going to do an audit, right? They're going to have their feet pressed to the fire, unfortunately. And so there's a trigger for it. And it's whistleblower Elizabeth Warren is saying bad things about us, or we're being sued by some plaintiff or some regulator. And that's what typically drives an audit. And it typically comes from legal or governance and never from business or technology. You know, it's hard to talk about these things, but I think it's important for people to understand. I've had companies in the midst of being sued by plaintiffs, by regulators, where, you know, general counsel, governance is pushing for an audit, and the business and the data science functions are screaming and fighting the entire way, even with, you know, legal action pending.
I have to say, I'm surprised to hear that, especially when it comes to the generative AI
Mm-hmm.
aspect of
Mm-hmm.
this. There have been so many calls for information about AI governance at
Mm-hmm.
an enterprise level and
Mm-hmm.
how to kind of proactively govern these
Mm-hmm.
systems so that you don't into hot water
Mm-hmm.
and you don't have the whistleblower.
Mm-hmm.
So is that aspirational versus what's
Aspirational is a very kind way to put it. It's just marketing.
okay?
It's just marketing.
Mm.
There's great money to be made by talking about AI governance. Actually, let's not say great money. There's a lot better money to be made just by pumping up whatever, you know, saying AI can do crazy stuff that it can't do. But there's okay money in kind of pumping up AI governance. And that's what a lot of people do. And again, I don't think that that's not special. That's not weird. Like, think about the whole ESG movement, right? And how there's so much greenwashing. And it's the same phenomenon as greenwashing. It's just the exact same phenomenon as greenwashing. Or
Interesting.
that's my
Do
take
you
as someone who's been doing it for
I
5 years.
Okay. I'll take your take. I mean, is there a part of you that is optimistic when it comes to this like inflection point where we're at introducing this emerging technology, or is this you think that's just going to follow the same pattern you've seen?
Yeah, it's just going to follow the same pattern. Again, like, there's no magic. So one, like, on first blush, this can feel depressing, right? But I think if once you accept reality, it can be empowering, right? Because then you can make real progress. So the reality is that we're witnessing the dawn of, like, the plastics industry. Like, this is what it would have felt like when DuPont was rolling out plastic bottles for the first time, whenever that was, 40 or 50 years ago. I could have gotten the dates wrong there. But the point I'm trying to make is I don't think AI is a special industry, right? Like, big industries start and they grow, and good things happen and bad things happen, and people are harmed and people make a lot of money, and sometimes the products are useful and sometimes they're not. And we're witnessing the start of a new industry. And I want to be very clear that this new industry is much more like plastics, or maybe railroads or aviation. This is not the new nuclear weapons. Okay. And there's a lot of self-aggrandizement, people, you know, running around wanting to be the new Oppenheimer and talking about how AI is going to kill the world. You know, I find that all very morally repugnant, actually, and completely invalid from a scientific perspective. But, you know, that's just the world we live in. I find it really helpful to compare it to plastics, right? Like in The Graduate, the old movie, where they're like, "Son, go into plastics," right? You know, they're like,
Yeah.
go into AI. It's probably good career advice, but, you know, in decades, we're going to be dealing with all the fallout of all the stuff that's happened from doing crappy AI.
So you talked about the Oppenheimer
Yeah,
effect, right?
yeah.
In the past year, we've seen tech giants vow to, pause innovation on things and
Hmm.
then all of a sudden found new companies around it.
Mhm, mhm,
Interestingly enough,
mhm.
and I've heard you talk about this. These kinds of conversations are distractions
Yeah,
from
from
what's
real risk
real.
management. Yes, yeah, they're clearly distractions from real risk management. So one, I want to be clear that I don't want nuclear proliferation because of Chat GPT. I don't want more child porn because of, you know, some image generating system. There are real risk. There are serious risk. If there is a risk of sort of proliferation of weapons of mass destruction, then I want people to be working on that. But the people who should be working on that have nothing to do with the tech industry, right? They're sitting in nondescript office buildings in this city in Washington, D.C. They've been working on nuclear weapons in top secret facilities for their whole careers. There's no one in the tech industry that has any business going anywhere near that stuff. And then that gets back to the notion of unexplainable models and black boxes. Why'd you let the nuclear weapon information into your precious baby Python code? You know, why did you let the child porn into your precious baby of Python code? You were powerless to stop that as the all powerful Oppenheimer developer here. None of it makes any sense. It's all just silliness. This is just hyper capitalism, late stage capitalism, rushing products to market in a very irresponsible way. That's all it is.
How can people cut through all of that hype and just have pragmatic conversations and get to what needs to be done?
I don't know, because I would not recommend that people live the way I live, and I'm sure my friends and family would say the same.
Why is that?
Because it takes like constant self-education and constant study and constant work to cut through just the magical thinking and the hype around this stuff. The tech industry runs on hype, right? And I think that's one problem why I struggle. I've worked at vendors. I won't be surprised if I work at a vendor again. But the hype is just a nonstop struggle for me. And it takes constant work to cut through the hype. You can be a real old fashioned meanie and just be like, I'm only reading papers with 100 plus citations in textbooks. If you did that, and peer review papers, not just archive papers. I do want to point out, and I don't know how much of this will resonate with the audience, but with generative AI, we've taken another step down the anti-scientific method and fully turned our back on peer review and just been like, well, if I post it in a fancy conference template on a preprint service, it's done. So if you were to read articles that were peer reviewed, with 100 plus citations in textbooks, you would have an extraordinarily different picture of what AI is capable of and a much more accurate picture of what AI is capable of. But at the same time, you're going to miss out on all the fun. And, that's just a really boring, difficult way to live, to only deal in sort of like the highest level of reviewed literature. And of course, we get things wrong. Like academics get things wrong all the time too. So even in doing that, you're not guaranteed to get all good information, but you're going to get much better information than if you're just looking at LinkedIn or TikTok or whatever. You have to go on an information diet, I would say. Like
Mhm.
that's what we have to do. There's so much disinformation. These generative AI systems are disinformation machines, among other. Like, I don't want to come across as overly critical on them. These people are probably going to win the Turing Prize. Many of them, they probably should. They can be incredibly useful tools if used the right way. But there's a million different ways to look at them. And one way is they're just disinformation machines, and they're going to make the disinformation problem even harder. And sadly, scarily, what we need to get through all this is like an information diet where we're all very conscious about the information we consume. And so I'm not optimistic about the near future in terms of nice things happening with people and AI. But I think understanding that reality allows you to take steps to do something about
I mean, you're an educator, you're somebody who, one of the fundamental things you're doing is grounding your
it. Mm-hmm.
students in a more disciplined approach
Mm-hmm.
to information. Is there anything that you recommend to them
Yes.
in their daily lives,
Go
and
to the
also for
library.
future business
Yeah.
leaders, right? People who are going to be working with these vendors. What is a sustainable information diet as
Mm-hmm.
opposed to becoming a hermit
Well,
of
yeah,
academia?
yeah, yeah, yeah. We don't need more of those either. We don't need more of those either. Those aren't really doing any good either. But one thing I talk to my students, and this applies to everyone, you can go to the library, and I think it makes more sense on a college campus. But there's like two libraries very close to my house, and in fact, I do take my kid to the main downtown DC library pretty often. But when you're on a college campus, like, you just have no business not going to the library. And I will say, like, when you have the experience of like, looking through all these reviewed bibliographies and, working with reference librarians and these very structured, curated ways of dealing with high quality information that, of course, have discrimination issues, that, of course, have access and inclusivity issues. At no point is there any comparison between, pulling your head up from that and looking at LinkedIn or looking at Instagram. It's just like, wow, this is a tidal wave of bullshit. Like, this is like, over here is like information that smart human beings work for centuries to curate, to generate knowledge. And over here is a tidal wave of bullshit. So go to the library. I just don't think social media is the place to get your news. But that's a very stupid thing to say, because people are just going to get their news from social media. Here's another thing. If it's free, you're the product. That's a cheesy saying by now, but I find that my students, some of them actually haven't heard it, right? And so if you're getting information for free, somebody's selling you. You're either being sold to, or someone is selling your data if you're getting information for free. So I think, go to the library and buyer beware. Think about, what is someone trying to sell here when they're showing you this information? And oftentimes they're trying to sell things. And it may be that they're selling ads to you. It may be that they're getting your data and reselling it in ways that would probably be illegal in Europe, or it may be, just a plain old fashioned scam. I mean, who knows? But I think thinking about what are people selling when they're providing you information is maybe more realistic advice than go to the library, but I'm going to stick with go to the library too.
I was raised by
Okay.
librarians, not literally, but at the
Yeah.
library, so
Yeah.
I'm
Yeah.
100% for this.
Awesome. Awesome.
We are almost at time, but
Okay.
I did want to cover, and this might be a very big topic in terms of responsible slash fair
Hmm.
AI versus risk management
Hmm.
and legal compliance.
Hmm.
How do you frame risk management and legal compliance versus responsible AI and AI fairness?
I want people to be responsible and ethical with AI, and I certainly want AI systems outcomes to be as fair as possible. But what I've observed in sort of my practice of doing it is that companies are companies. Companies are there to make money. Over the years, governance and compliance functions have evolved in companies for different reasons. And you'll just have more success approaching, legal, compliance, security, data privacy. If you approach those traditional functions within large organizations that are sort of primed to take action in terms of governance and have agency within the organization to take some action in terms of governance, you'll make a lot more progress than if you kind of start out on your own talking about complex political topics that for-profit entities just aren't really there to deliberate. I think it goes back to this notion of no magical thinking, right? Like just accept reality as it is. And the reality as it is that companies don't want to be responsible with AI. They want to make money with AI. That's their first job. Their first job is to make money with AI. They already have these internal functions that are there to provide governance that they've sort of accepted, and you will just make more progress working with them. I'm not an ethicist. I don't think I'm the right person to be making serious calls about fairness, but I do think that I can work with risk management inside of large organizations to make some progress. That's been my approach. The last thing I'll say here is I've met a lot of responsible AI directors with no budget and no staff. So they're not going to get anything done. Like that's just the bottom line. And it's a lot easier, a lot more efficient to work with the existing governance mechanisms within corporations whose job it is to make money with AI, and being responsible with AI is at most a secondary concern. And that's just the reality. That's just the reality of the
That
situation.
makes That actually reminds me of, people saying, well, there are a lot of DEI
Yeah.
directors with no money and no
Yeah.
staff. It's very much you know,
There's probably a lot
it's
of
about
ESG
image. It's about
directors with no
image
money
and
and
it's
no
not
staff.
about, yes,
Yeah.
exactly. It's about corporate responsibility with no action behind it,
Yeah.
which I think that's a cultural issue, right? You know,
There's good
eh,
marketing
I
bucks to
think
be made by saying that you engage in these things, right? We've all decided as a society that we want these companies to be super powerful and make lots of money. Now, maybe each individual hasn't decided that, but as a whole, we've certainly sat around and let our policies change to the point where this is the case. And so I feel like for me anyway, I work within the governance mechanisms that are there. And I found that to be much more effective than sort of pushing these delicate matters like privacy and fairness inside a large corporation who's simply not made to adjudicate those kinds of topics.
unless they're willing to invest
Mm-hmm.
in
And I want to be clear, some
in
are. Some are.
responsible AI
Yeah. Yeah.
position
Yeah.
and team.
It's 80-20.
Yeah.
It's 80-20. There are companies out there who are willing, and there are companies out there who are already regulated. Medical devices and consumer finance and employment decisions, these are spaces that are highly regulated, and in my experience they tend to draw people who want to be more responsible. And I think that's another aspect. A lot of my work is with banks and government, and because they're so highly regulated, they tend to draw a different audience that makes it easier to get work done. And there's not this sort of threshold question of why do we have to do governance. In consumer finance,
Right.
the Federal Reserve and the Office of the Comptroller of Currency say you have to have a big governance program or you're in trouble. And that's a much easier framework to work in than we just want to go fast and break things, and we're making billions of dollars of going fast and breaking things. And, we're not interested in governance. Go do your audit over there. That's the general mindset in the tech industry, in my opinion. Whereas in banking or medical devices, it's going to feel very different. I think one thing that I'm kind of confused by that I'll just throw out is I go to companies and they're like bending over backwards to try to figure out how to use generative AI. And I don't get that. If it's as hyped up as it's supposed to be, which it can't possibly be, but if it's 80% of what it's hyped up to be, why does it require so much work on the consumer end to figure out how to use it and especially use it in some way that's not going to get you in big trouble? That's a question that's been on my mind, right? The companies that are making generative AI, they're well funded. Why do their work for them? They need to bring us a product that works as is. And that's not what I'm seeing inside of companies. I'm seeing companies really bend over backwards to try to like reverse engineer generative AI into some process that already works. And I don't understand the financial motivations there.
From my point of view, I'll offer. So, Writer for the past couple of years has been doing small experiments with internal
See,
teams
you said
at enterprise
experiments. You're
companies.
already, you're already, you're already way ahead. You said
Ah,
experiments.
right?
Hmm.
And that was like a couple years before OpenAI
Yeah, yeah,
launched
yeah.
ChatGPT to the public. And there was the early adopter hype cycle happening, but it wasn't happening at the explosive rate
Yeah,
once ChatGPT
yeah.
went commercial to public users. And I think that at Writer, they were anticipating, okay, this is going to be a not slow adoption, but definitely a steady adoption cycle where we're going to find use cases within certain teams and then co-discover them,
Hmm.
right?
Hmm.
Discover them. How do we operationalize this process so that becomes a workflow as opposed to just one-off chat sessions or
Hmm.
one-off writing sessions? And then everything kind of went backwards because of the mass hysteria over ChatGPT. And then suddenly everybody's flooding with trying to figure out how to shove this hyped up technology into their use cases. And I think that everything just got accelerated way faster because of that hype
Yeah.
cycle.
It's a big one. It's a big one.
So it's unprecedented. And let me say that it's a beautiful challenge for a startup
Yeah.
to try to keep up with the market. But it's also, some of the ways that we were having really good conversations with companies and creating frameworks to have these conversations and experimentation and use case discovery.
Hmm.
Luckily, we created a template way before some other folks did, but it's still, trying to cut through all of that noise and say, hey, there actually is a
Yeah.
pragmatic way to approach
Yeah.
this. There are ways of pragmatically mapping use cases.
Yeah. No, that sounds
So,
right to me.
from your point of view, when you're talking to people about risk management and responsible implementation and things like that, and I know that you're working on AI beyond generative AI, but now I'm sure there's a huge demand
Yeah.
for your.
Yeah. 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 Yeah, I think that's been the curious part of me is a lot of times I'm just like, why are you doing this? Like, is this even saving you money? And I guess the idea is that it's probably not saving money today, but this is just the way things are going to be. And so we've just got to get in front of it. And there's probably some logic to that. It's curious to me. It's like with AI, getting back to the theme of buyer beware, it's like we're the opposite. And even big, sophisticated corporations are the opposite. It's like buyer be stupid and just do anything possible to work this technology in, whether it makes any sense or not. And I have to hope that in the future, these investments will pay off.
What advice would you give to
You said it great.
larger company when it comes to like looking for? Because I mean, I know you're critical
Yeah.
of AI
Yeah.
vendors, but reality is they are going to want to partner with
Yeah.
AI vendors. So, what should they be looking for when they're looking to partner with an AI vendor? What approach should that vendor be? Like immediately, that's a green flag for a good partnership.
You said it great. You said experiments and use case studies and templates. That's a great way to do it. That's a great way to do it is work to understand where you're not jamming a square peg into a round hole, where it works organically and naturally in your business processes. And I think you said it great. Templates, experiments, use case studies, that's what it takes to get it right. And that's boring, roll your sleeves up hard work, which doesn't have the fun automation AI vibes that are out there in the market today. But I think everybody, most people who are smart with AI understand that it's not just going to work, right? It's going to take rolling up your sleeves and doing some real human work. And that's just the key to it.
Thank you so much.
Very
This is a
welcome.
great conversation.
I hope so.
I really do appreciate your very like pragmatic, realistic point of view. I mean, I think that's definitely going to be the through line of this episode is cutting through that
Okay. No,
magical
that's
thinking.
awesome. That's
Yeah?
awesome. Did you watch the new True Detective?
Yes.
I felt like Jodie Foster's character. So I felt like that's my and that's dark, right? Like that's dark. Yeah. When people are like, this doesn't make any sense. She was like, no, it does. We don't understand. We're not asking the right questions. And I think just that devotion to like, this is reality. There's no magic. We're gonna find the bottom of this. That really resonated with me. That really resonated with me. Maybe not the bad cop aspects, but the
the
devotion,
asking the right questions.
Yeah, and just the devotion to that. There's no magic here. Mm-hmm. There is a real boring reality that makes sense that we're just gonna doggedly get to. That really resonated with me.
I love that. And I hope that, we were still recording about that analogy because I'm going to.
Okay. Yeah, that might be better.
I really loved it.